Hello and welcome to HD32. I am Alex Wolken. I will be the heart for HD32, which is going to be a channel dedicated to creating 32-bit games. I'm really excited to give you a little peek into who I was in the past, how I got into video games, and kind of my personal philosophy to life and as being an indie game dev. And I hope that my story in this channel is kind of a jumping off point or a bit of inspiration for you whenever you're working on your own creative projects or if you're trying to get into video games yourself. My knowledge and experience, especially on a personal level even, of me like overcoming depression when I was young, getting into games, might be of use to you. So let me just go back in the past, back to the young Alex, when I was a wee little lad and I was playing games, and I was pretty fortunate whenever it comes to that. So when I was a kiddo, my ancient being self, I had older brothers. I had two older brothers, one younger brother. I had two older brothers that liked video games. So they got all of the consoles first whenever they came out. And because of my age, which you might be able to find online, whatever it might be. And hey, this is a time capsule. I'll look forever young in this video. But back in the past, when I was a young little wee lad, my older brothers got themselves an Atari. So I actually started off playing games back in the Atari days. And that was thanks to my older brothers being older than me, being interested in video games. I got to play kind of the older consoles from almost the very beginning, which was really cool. So I have all sorts of experiences, including one birthday getting E.T. for the Atari and hating that game, thinking it was my fault, only to learn years later that it's considered one of the worst games of all time. But me, my 4 or 5 year old self struggling to play E.T. didn't realize what a bad game was until then. So I grew up playing games, loving them the whole time. Every generation, we got almost like every little console, and my love for them just grew and grew and grew. And I just tried to pursue creating content for games in any method I could. So when I was young, my personal form of expression was both drawing and writing. And so when I was young, my main goal was actually become a writer, and more specifically, I wanted to write for video games. So creative writing was my love. It's what I wanted to do so badly. So up into college, I get all the way up to the 500 level courses. I've been doing creative writing all of these years, and I've been also doing blog sites based on video games, and everything was kind of like writing and video games. Those are the two things. Those are the two loves in my life, was writing and video games. And I wanted them to be together. But there was a little bit of a thing in the way, which was depression. And that is something I struggled for my entire life. I'm also someone that has ADHD, so I struggled with that as well. And I learned lots of tools to overcome both. But at the time when I was in college, it really put a damper on me pursuing creative writing. It was too difficult for me to turn in my work to class because I was too terrified about the judgment and critique of the other students. And so my depression just made it just so difficult to pursue writing because I was too hard on myself. And because I was too hard on myself, I wouldn't even turn in an assignment if I thought that a professor or another student wouldn't like that work. I just wouldn't turn it in, period. So, of course, you don't turn in assignments, you get bad grades. And I flunked out of college. And I was working retail all the time at GameStop. And that was my whole life, was paychecks going back into GameStop, buying games, and working the retail. And it finally got to be just a little too much. Working retail, as so many of you know, is just stressful day in, day out. For those that are working that are retail warriors now, or working in fast food or any other job, you know how that just kind of emotionally strains on you and how difficult it can be. And so I had to decide what I was going to do with myself, because I wanted to be a creative writer. I wanted to do something creative within games, but my depression was holding me back. And at this same time, as a side job, I was actually doing graphic design for a local sign company. So I was doing all this graphic design work. And what's funny was I would create these logos, these billboards, toss them off to the client, and they would be like, this sucks, improve this. No, this is great, I approve that. I didn't care. I was passionate about the graphic design side of things because I also grew up doing art and drawing and loving that. But what was funny was I had this like aha moment, which was here I am doing creative writing, and it's like literally just, it's emotionally killing me to turn in these assignments. Meanwhile, on the other hand, I'm doing another creative pursuit, which is graphic design, and these clients can tell me my stuff is dog shit. I didn't care. So I was like, why am I pursuing creative writing if it's so painful for me? And there's things looking back now where I was emotionally, I could have pursued creative writing if I had gotten a better handle of, say, my depression. But what was funny was like there was this lifeline for me to get out of this life of working retail, and there's nothing that's stopping graphic design from being in video games. And so I went ahead and I enrolled at a college that was outside of my town because I wanted to do a restart for my life. And to put in perspective how bad my academic grades were at this point in college, I had the first tour for this college, which was, I'll go ahead and say, is University of Central Missouri. And the person that was the head of the art department, I presented my portfolio to him and looked through my GPA, and he was just like, we normally don't let people like you in. Your GPA is terrible. But he liked me on a personal level, and he said, I have this good feeling about you, and your portfolio is great. I think you can make it here despite how bad your GPA is. So I'm going to give you this chance. And he was just an excellent professor. I'll probably talk about him sometime down the line in a separate video. But he gave me this lifeline and this chance to get out of it. And so I was so grateful that whenever I went to college again as like a 26, 27-year-old, one of the oldest people in my college, I pursued it as hard as I could. I tried my best, and I was almost able to save my GPA even by the end of it. But I was like, this is my chance to change my life and not take back on this opportunity. And so I was pursuing graphic design, doing classes, doing great. And I decided that I was going to start looking into work related to video games. Now, I live here in the Midwest, specifically Missouri, which is not the tech wonderland. No one thinks of Missouri as a place where you're going to find video game work. It's always going to be East Coast. It's always going to be Texas. It's always going to be Chicago. It's going to be New York. It's going to be some major city. It's not going to be Springfield, Missouri, population of nothing. And lo and behold, the place where I grew up did have a few studios, video game studios. At the time, there was one called Black Lantern Studios. It was actually, they were one of the companies contracted with Disney, and they were making a lot of their titles. And this was before Disney decided to shut down most of their video game studios. Now they're back at it making games. But there was a time, a number of years back, in which Disney said, screw it, we're cutting all of our third-party studios making our games. We're going in-house. We're not going to do this. And they shuttered it. And by cutting that off, Black Lantern Studios here in Springfield closed down. So I was like, crap, there goes one of my opportunities. Thankfully, though, there was one little other independent studio named Spellbook Studios that worked on, they had like a big mobile MMO title called Infinite Black. Small studio, essentially it was created by one person who hit it big with this MMO and was able to grow and expand it from there. And he was looking to hire people to work there. And I was like, maybe I can give it a shot with my graphic design. And what I could say is I was going to do UI, because I do have a general interest in UI, because it's pretty closely associated with graphic design. It's like, this is my in, I'm going to try this. And so I applied, the interview went great, and I got the work. And I was still in college at the time. I still had 2 years left of this graphic design degree. And the entire time I was going to college 2 hours away, meanwhile working at this video game studio. And so whenever summers come around, I would work the 9 to 5 there. To be honest, we'll get into it later, way more than 9 to 5, but that's just true of video games, general, lots of crunch. And I was still doing school. Tide passed by, and I graduated and all that, and I went there and I worked there full time. And for 5 years, I went from being a graphic designer to being a technical art director, which is a weirdo mix of someone that knows a little bit of programming, at that time, a very little amount of programming, and art. And I was like in charge of the art team there, which was small. We only had about 15 people at the studio, and we made a few games, which were Heroes of Dire, Infinite Black, The Infinite Black 2, And then about the 5-year mark is whenever I decided to leave there and go back to working a true graphic design position. And part of it was the place I worked ended up being both a blessing and a curse. I'm going to say 70% blessing, 30% curse. And part of that 30% curse was who I was whenever I started working that position. Because whenever I got a job in the game industry, I was so excited. I was like, I'm going to cling to this opportunity to work in video games, and I will break myself working on these games. So I was working crazy hours, which was making me a stressful mess. Anytime the studio was having financial trouble, I would let it get to me personally and stress me out. And so I was at times kind of like a little bit of a monster to be around when I was working in that studio. And I'm going to talk about my time at that independent studio later, because it was just too stressful. And I ended up leaving there to do graphic design because it was just something that was a little less stressful. But always left me with kind of like a little aching inside me, because it was what I wanted to do. Working in video games is what I want to do. And it was simply that who I was as a person didn't know how to, like, I just hadn't matured enough to handle the stress of being an independent developer just yet. And also the stresses of being in a studio. And like I said, I can't wait to talk about that kind of stuff on the channel. That's like one of the big things, is I want to talk about what it is to be like an indie dev, the struggles, the pains, the goods, the bads, all that stuff. And also I want to talk about how I went from graphic design into video games. Like, I didn't go to a Full Sail. I didn't go to some sort of game-specific college or technical path or whatever. I came from the outside, and I want you guys to know that too. You can come from the outside and work in video games. I'll cover more in a longer video, but you do not have to go to a game-specific college to work in video games. That's specifically not entirely what they even want out of a potential employee. No offense to those colleges, they're still incredible and they're excellent for the networking. But in this day and age, that doesn't have to be the path you have to choose. So part of all this is to say that this channel is going to be about the independent, like the how to become an indie dev yourself, the game projects I am working on, and honestly, just how you can be a developer while not living in a major city like Seattle or something like that. Because that's what you don't have to feel that you can't pursue being a game developer because you live in some podunk place. My city's a little big for Missouri. I'll just say that, though. I'm the third biggest city in Missouri. We're not that podunk. We're a little bigger than podunk. But don't give up. I hope you stay with me on this channel to learn and grow. I can't wait to cover my past a little bit more for you to follow along with the games that I'm working on. And I'll always be there to provide advice and feedback for you. And feel free to reach out on either my Instagram at HardDrive32, this channel, HardDrive32 on YouTube. See a trend, it's all HardDrive32. And feel free to reach out if you are pursuing into games or you have any advice or feedback from me. I can't wait to hear it. And let's go on this journey together, and I'll catch up with you later.